The emergency lights cast red shadows across the twisted metal that used to be Kepler Station. Commander Davis floated through the wreckage, his helmet light cutting through the darkness. Bodies drifted past him. Men, women, children. Scientists who had been working on terraforming technology just hours ago. "How many?" he asked into his comm. 847 confirmed dead, sir," came the reply. "No survivors." Davis closed his eyes. Kepler Station had been a research facility, not a military base. These people had families back on Earth. They had been studying how to make dead worlds bloom with life. Now they were dead themselves. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Park, drifted up beside him. She held a datapad with shaking hands. "Sir, we found the recording equipment." "The Zephyrians. They broadcast everything." Davis took the pad and watched the footage. The Zephyrian Syndicate had not just attacked the station. They had made it a show. The alien pirates had live-streamed the massacre across the galaxy, laughing as they killed unarmed civilians. They wanted everyone to see what happened when you had something they wanted. The Zephyrians were not just pirates. They were monsters wearing the shape of beings who had once been civilized. Their leader, warlord Thexon, had personally executed the station commander's family while the man watched. Then he had looked directly into the camera. "This is what happens when you refuse to pay tribute," Thexon had said in broken galactic standard. "We take what we want. Your lives mean nothing to us." Davis turned off the recording. He had seen enough. 3 days later, the Galactic Council met in emergency session. The massive chamber on Nexus Prime buzzed with worried voices from 100 different species. Representatives floated, walked, slithered, and hovered to their seats as the session began. Ambassador Chen Wei sat in the human section, her face calm but her eyes hard as steel. She had been Earth's voice in the galaxy for 10 years. She had negotiated trade deals and peace treaties. She had helped settle disputes between species that had been fighting for centuries. But today was different. The Veltar representative spoke first. Its crystalline form shimmered as it projected thoughts into sound. The Zephyrian attack was terrible, yes, but we must think carefully about our response. Violence only creates more violence. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. The Axiom delegate, a being of pure energy contained in a metal suit, added its voice. "The Syndicate wants the terraforming technology. Perhaps we can negotiate. Give them mining rights to some dead systems." Everyone wins, more nods. The Krogan ambassador, despite his species' warrior culture, even suggested prisoner exchanges. "We give them what they want, they give us some hostages. Better than a war." Chen listened to it all. Species after species stood up to suggest compromise. Tribute payments, territorial concessions, anything to avoid direct confrontation with the Zephyrian Syndicate. Finally, the council president, an ancient being called a moderator, turned to Chen. "Ambassador Chen, humanity has suffered a great loss. But surely you see the wisdom in negotiation? What is your government's position?" Chen stood slowly. The chamber fell silent. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly to every corner of the vast room. "Humans don't negotiate with murderers." The words hung in the air like a physical thing. The Veltar representative's crystals flickered with confusion. "But Ambassador, surely you don't mean—" "I mean exactly what I said," Chen interrupted. "The Zephyrian Syndicate murdered 847 innocent people. They broadcast it for entertainment. They think this makes them strong. They're wrong." The Axiom delegate's suit hummed with agitation. "Ambassador Chen, please be reasonable. The Syndicate has thousands of ships. They control dozens of systems. A direct confrontation would cost millions of lives." Chen's expression never changed. The people of Kepler Station had lives too. They had families. They had dreams. The Syndicate took all of that away. Not for resources. Not for territory. For fun. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of every representative who would look at her. For too long, this galaxy has treated evil like it's something you can bargain with. You pay tribute to pirates and call it peace. You negotiate with terrorists and call it diplomacy. You feed monsters and hope they eat you last. The Krogan ambassador shifted uncomfortably. His own species had once been raiders before they learned the cost of endless war. But what alternative is there? The Syndicate will not simply disappear because we wish it. No, Chen agreed. They won't disappear because we wish it. They'll disappear because we make them disappear. A new voice spoke up from the back of the chamber. It belonged to the hegemony representative, a species that had been fighting the Zephyrians for decades. "Easy words, human. But your fleet is small. Your territory is limited. What can one species do against the Syndicate? Chen smiled, and there was something in that smile that made several representatives shift nervously. You're about to find out. The session continued for hours after that. Species after species tried to convince Chen to reconsider. They offered human ships safe passage through their territory if Earth would just be reasonable. They promised economic aid to help rebuild Kepler Station. They suggested joint task forces and coordinated responses and every other option except the one that mattered. Justice. When the session finally ended, Chen walked out without saying another word. She had said everything that needed saying. The galaxy would either understand or it wouldn't, but humanity's course was set. That night, as Chen sat in her quarters overlooking Nexus Prime's capital city, her secure communicator chimed. The face of Admiral Sarah Voss appeared on the screen. Voss commanded Earth's deep space fleet, what few ships humanity had been able to build in their short time among the stars. Ambassador, Voss said without preamble, I've received my orders from Earth Command. Every available ship is being recalled. We're forming the largest fleet in human history. How long? Chen asked. 72 hours to full deployment. The Syndicate won't expect us to move this fast, Chen nodded. Other species took months to organize military responses. They had committees and subcommittees and debates about logistics. Humans were different. When something needed doing, they did it. Admiral, Chen said, the Council thinks we're being unreasonable. They think we should negotiate. Voss's face was stone. Ma'am, I've seen the recordings from Kepler Station. I've read the casualty reports. There's nothing to negotiate. The galaxy might not understand what we're about to do. Then we'll teach them, Voss said simply. Some lessons can only be learned one way. After the call ended, Chen stood at her window for a long time. Far above, she could see the lights of ships moving through space, trade vessels and passenger liners and diplomatic couriers, all of them safe because they believed in the illusion that evil could be reasoned with. Tomorrow, that illusion would begin to crack. The Zephyrian Syndicate had made their choice when they decided to murder innocents for entertainment. Now humanity would make theirs. In the distance, a human transport ship broke orbit, heading for the edge of the system. It carried a simple message to Earth Command. The galaxy has been warned. Begin the hunt. Chen closed her eyes and said a prayer for the people of Kepler Station. They would have justice, no matter what it cost. Admiral Sarah Voss stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution, watching her fleet assemble in the empty space beyond Earth's moon. 137 ships. Everything humanity could put into space. Destroyers and cruisers and the massive dreadnought that served as her flagship. It was the largest human fleet ever assembled. It was also tiny compared to what other species could field. The Krogan had 1,000 ships. The Veltar had entire fleets that never saw a home port. Even the peaceful Axiom had more firepower than humanity could dream of. But numbers weren't everything. Admiral, her communications officer called out. We're receiving a transmission from the Galactic Council. Put it through. The face of the Council President appeared on the main screen. The ancient moderator looked tired, as if the weight of 1,000 species pressed down on its shoulders. Admiral Voss, I urge you to reconsider this course of action. The Syndicate has offered to negotiate. They're willing to discuss reparations. Voss didn't even blink. What kind of reparations bring back 847 dead civilians? Admiral, please be reasonable. A war will solve nothing. This isn't a war, Voss said quietly. Wars are fought between civilized beings over resources or territory or ideology. This is pest control. The moderator's expression shifted, something like shock crossing its ancient features. You cannot simply decide to exterminate an entire organization. There are laws, conventions, proper procedures. The Zephyrian Syndicate decided to forfeit the protection of law when they chose to become animals, Voss replied. They made their choice. Now we make ours. She cut the transmission and turned to her navigation officer. Set course for the Helix Nebula. The Syndicate has a base there. We start with that. The human fleet moved as one, their ships accelerating toward the edge of the system. Behind them, Earth grew smaller until it was just another point of light. Ahead lay the vast darkness of space, and somewhere in that darkness, monsters wearing the faces of civilized beings. The first target was a Syndicate supply depot hidden in the Helix Nebula's gas clouds. Intelligence said it held stolen goods from a dozen species, and served as a way station for raids into civilized space. The perfect place to send a message. When the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace, the depot's commander probably thought it was another raid. Syndicate bases got attacked regularly by species trying to rescue hostages or recover stolen property. But those attacks were always limited, always careful, always worried about escalation. The humans weren't worried about escalation. All ships, this is Admiral Voss, she broadcast on all frequencies. You have 30 minutes to evacuate any civilian personnel. After that, we're coming in. The response came quickly. Warlord Cruex, who ran the depot, appeared on screen. He was typical Zephyrian, scaled skin, multiple arms, eyes that had seen too much cruelty. Human Admiral, you make mistake. This is Syndicate territory. You leave now or we make you leave. 29 minutes, Voss said and cut the transmission. What happened next confused every military observer in the galaxy. Instead of positioning for a siege or demanding surrender, the human ships simply waited. They hung in space like patient predators, counting down the minutes. At exactly 30 minutes, they moved. The attack was unlike anything the galaxy had seen. Most species fought with overwhelming force or careful precision. The humans fought with something else entirely. Absolute determination. They didn't try to capture the base. They didn't try to minimize their own casualties. They simply erased it. But even in their fury, they were precise. Escape pods carrying civilian workers and slaves were allowed to flee. Only military targets felt the humans' wrath. When the shooting stopped, the depot was gone. Not damaged, not captured, gone. Warlord Cruex's final transmission was a scream of rage and disbelief. He couldn't understand how beings could be so cold, so methodical in their destruction. The humans had given him time to evacuate innocents, then killed him without hesitation or mercy. The galaxy watched the recordings with growing unease. This wasn't how wars were supposed to work. Where were the demands for surrender? The offers to negotiate? The careful rules that kept conflict from becoming slaughter? The humans moved to their next target without pause. A Syndicate fleet base orbiting a dead world. The pattern repeated. Warning: evacuation time for civilians. Complete destruction of everything else. By the third attack, the Syndicate began to understand. These humans weren't trying to win territory or capture resources. They were methodically hunting down every Syndicate asset they could find and erasing it from existence. In the Syndicate stronghold of Vex Prime, emergency meetings ran day and night. Warlords who had terrorized the galaxy for decades found themselves facing something they had never encountered. An enemy that couldn't be reasoned with, bribed or intimidated. They're insane, declared Warlord Thexon, the butcher of Kepler Station. No civilized species fights like this. Where are the demands? The negotiations? The proper forms of war? His lieutenant, a scarred veteran named Corvex, studied the tactical displays. Sir, they're not fighting like a civilized species. They're fighting like us. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. For generations, the Syndicate had terrorized the galaxy, precisely because no one else would sink to their level. Civilized beings had rules, laws, moral boundaries they wouldn't cross. The Syndicate had counted on that civilization to protect them. The humans didn't seem to care about civilization when justice was at stake. Reports flooded in from across Syndicate space. Human strike teams hitting supply convoys, human ships appearing without warning to destroy raider bases, human forces moving with a precision and ruthlessness that made even hardened pirates nervous. But strangest of all were the rescues. When the humans found Syndicate ships carrying slaves or hostages, they didn't just destroy the ships. They executed surgical strikes that saved every innocent life while killing every pirate. It was as if they could see through walls, as if they knew exactly where everyone was before they even arrived. The galaxy began to realize something that chilled them to their cores. The humans weren't just warriors. They were artists of violence, painting their justice in Syndicate blood while never touching a single innocent. After the sixth attack, the Veltar sent another diplomatic mission to the human fleet. Their crystalline ships approached the UES Retribution under flags of truce and peaceful intent. Ambassador Kelthan materialized on the human flagship's bridge, its crystal form shimmering with nervous energy. Admiral Voss, this must stop. The Syndicate is ready to negotiate. They offer full reparations, return of all stolen goods, even territory concessions. Voss didn't look up from her tactical displays. What part of "we don't negotiate with murderers" was unclear. But Admiral, surely you see that continued violence serves no purpose. You've made your point. The Syndicate has learned their lesson. Now Voss did look up, and there was something in her eyes that made the crystal being step backward. Have they? Have they really? Because last I checked, Warlord Thexon was still breathing. The monster who personally executed children for entertainment is still alive. That doesn't sound like they've learned anything to me. Admiral, please. Ambassador, Voss said quietly. Your species has been paying tribute to the Syndicate for 40 years. 40 years of feeding monsters hoping they'd leave you alone. How has that worked out for you? Kelthan's crystalline form flickered with something that might have been shame. The Syndicate, they have always honored their agreements. They honored their agreement right up until they decided to massacre my people for fun, Voss replied. Now they're about to learn what honoring agreements really means. The Veltar ambassador tried again. But where does it end? If you destroy the Syndicate, others will rise to take their place. This solves nothing. Voss smiled, and that smile was colder than the space between stars. Others will rise, yes. And they'll look at what happened to the Syndicate and ask themselves a very important question. Is it worth it? Is whatever they think they'll gain worth risking the attention of the species that doesn't negotiate with murderers? The ambassador left without another word, its form dissolving into light and energy. Around the bridge, human officers went back to their work. They had a job to do, and they would see it through to the end, no matter what it cost. Warlord Thexon paced the command deck of his flagship, the Bloodfang, like a caged animal. For 30 years, he had been the terror of the outer systems. Species across the galaxy knew his name and paid tribute to avoid his wrath. Now, for the first time in his life, he was afraid. Status report, he growled at his communications officer. Sir, we've lost 18 bases in the last 2 weeks. The humans hit our supply depot at Corlex yesterday. No survivors. What about the others? The council species? The officer checked his displays nervously. Sir, the Veltar are offering to mediate. The Axiom want to arrange prisoner exchanges. Even the Krogan are suggesting territorial agreements. Thexron's scaled fist slammed into the nearest console, cracking the metal. Then contact them. Tell them we're ready to negotiate. Full reparations for the human station. Territory concessions. Whatever it takes. An hour later, representatives from 6 different species arrived aboard the Bloodfang. The Veltar ambassador Kelthan led the group. Behind it came delegates from the Axiom Collective, the Hegemony, the Krogan Empire, and others. They gathered in the ship's main conference room, their various forms creating a bizarre council of war. Warlord Thexon, Kelthan began, its crystal form pulsing with diplomatic energy. We have come to help arrange a peaceful solution to this conflict. Peace? Thexon laughed bitterly. These humans don't want peace. They want blood. Why blood specifically? The Axiom delegate, its energy form contained within a sleek metal suit, projected calm thoughts. All conflicts can be resolved through negotiation. What do the humans want? Territory? Technology? Tribute? They want me dead, Thexon said simply. They've made that clear. The Hegemony representative, a lizard-like being covered in ceremonial armor, hissed softly. Surely they can be made to see reason. What species commits to total war over one incident? One incident? Thexron's voice rose. I killed their civilians, and they acted like I had murdered their families personally. They don't think like us. They don't understand profit and loss. They understand something else. The meeting was interrupted by an urgent communication from the bridge. A human fleet had been detected at the edge of the system. Not the entire fleet this time, just a small strike force. But even a small human force had proven deadly. They're requesting to speak with you, sir, the communications officer reported. All of you. The main screen activated, showing the bridge of a human destroyer. A woman in a dark blue uniform stood at the center of the screen. Her rank insignia identified her as Captain Rodriguez, but her eyes held the same cold determination they had seen in every human they encountered. I am Captain Elena Rodriguez of the UES Vengeance, she said without preamble. I understand you're having a diplomatic meeting. How nice. I'm here to deliver a message. Kelthan stepped forward, its crystalline form shimmering with hope. Captain, we are grateful for this opportunity to communicate. Perhaps we can reach an understanding. Understanding? Rodriguez's expression didn't change. I understand perfectly. You're all here trying to save a mass murderer because killing him might upset the status quo. Well, here's some news. The status quo is what allowed monsters like Thexon to exist in the first place. The Axiom delegate projected calming thoughts. Captain, surely you recognize that continued violence serves no one's interests. Warlord Thexon is prepared to offer full reparations for the attack on your station. Reparations. Rodriguez repeated the word like it tasted bitter. What reparations bring back the children he murdered? What payment restores the families he destroyed for entertainment? Thexon himself finally spoke up. Captain, I am willing to negotiate. Full surrender of the technology we took. Return of all prisoners. Even territorial concessions. Name your price. Rodriguez looked directly at him, and Thexon felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. The gaze of a predator looking at prey. My price? My price is simple, Warlord. You die. The conference room fell silent. The assembled diplomats exchanged nervous glances. This wasn't how civilized species conducted warfare. Captain, the Krogan representative rumbled. My species understands the desire for vengeance. But where does it end? If you destroy the Syndicate, others will rise to take their place. Let them, Rodriguez said calmly. Let them rise and remember what happened to the last group that decided to murder human civilians for fun. Maybe the next batch will be smarter. Kelthan tried again. But Captain, this approach only creates more enemies. The galaxy functions on negotiation and compromise. Without that, we have only chaos. You want to talk about chaos? Rodriguez's voice remained level, but there was steel underneath. The chaos of parents never knowing if their children will come home? The chaos of researchers being murdered for studying how to make dead worlds bloom? The chaos of monsters like Thexon being allowed to exist because killing them might be impolite. She paused, letting her words sink in. You've had your chaos, Ambassador. You've had it for generations. You just called it civilization. The hegemony representative hissed in frustration. You humans are being unreasonable. This absolutist thinking serves no one. Really. Rodriguez smiled, and that smile was terrifying in its coldness. Tell me, how many of your species has the Syndicate killed in the last year? How much tribute have you paid them? How many times have you negotiated with them and watched them break their agreements the moment it suited them? The room fell silent again. Every species represented had lost people to the Syndicate. Everyone had paid tribute or ransom, or turned a blind eye to atrocities because direct confrontation was too expensive. Here's what's going to happen. Rodriguez continued. You're all going to leave this system. You're going to go back to your governments and explain that the humans don't negotiate with murderers, and you're going to stay out of our way while we clean up the mess you've been ignoring for decades. And if we refuse? The Axiom delegate asked. Rodriguez's expression didn't change. Then you'll discover that our definition of murderer is broader than you might like. After the transmission ended, the diplomatic party sat in stunned silence. They had come expecting to broker a peace, to find some middle ground that would satisfy both sides. Instead, they had encountered something none of them understood: absolute moral conviction. She's bluffing, Thexon said finally. They can't threaten council species. The political fallout would be enormous, but even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. These humans had already proven they didn't care about political fallout. They cared about justice, and they were willing to pay any price to achieve it. The diplomatic ships left within the hour, carrying with them the growing realization that the galaxy was about to change in ways they couldn't predict or control. The humans had drawn a line in the void. Some acts were unforgivable, some crimes could not be negotiated away, and some people forfeited their right to exist the moment they chose to become monsters. That night, as Thexon tried to sleep in his quarters, he found himself thinking about the children he had killed at Kepler Station. At the time, it had seemed like good theater, a way to send a message about what happened to those who defied the Syndicate. Now he understood that he had sent a different message entirely. He had shown the humans what he really was beneath the veneer of civilization, and they had decided to respond in kind. For the first time in his life, the terror of the outer systems was afraid of the dark. Somewhere out there, patient and implacable, death was coming for him. It wore a human face and carried the weight of justice on its shoulders. The hunt was no longer a metaphor. It had become literal, personal, and absolutely final. In the depths of space, human ships moved like ghosts between the stars, their crews driven by something the galaxy had forgotten how to recognize: the simple, terrible certainty that some things were worth dying for, and some things were worth killing for. Malix Prime hung in space like a dying star, its surface scarred by centuries of warfare and exploitation. It was the Syndicate's final stronghold, a fortress world where the worst of the worst made their home. Orbital defense platforms bristled with weapons capable of destroying entire fleets. The planet's surface was honeycombed with bunkers and tunnels, creating a maze that had never been conquered. Admiral Sarah Voss stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution, studying the tactical displays. 3 months of hunting had brought them here, to this final confrontation. The Zephyrian Syndicate was cornered, desperate, and more dangerous than ever. "Admiral," her intelligence officer reported, "we're detecting massive troop movements on the surface. They're pulling back to the central fortress complex." "How many?" "Best estimate? 50,000 Syndicate troops, plus whatever mercenaries and allies they've managed to gather." Voss nodded grimly. The Syndicate had called in every favor, hired every gun they could afford. This wouldn't be like the surgical strikes they'd been conducting. This would be a siege, bloody and brutal. "Sir," her communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission from the planet. Put it through." Warlord Thexon's scarred face filled the main screen. The monster who had butchered Kepler Station looked older now, worn down by months of running and hiding. But his eyes still held the cruelty that had made him the terror of the outer systems. "Admiral Voss," he said, his voice carefully controlled, "I want to make one final offer." "I'm listening," Voss replied, though her tone suggested she wasn't particularly interested. "I have hostages," Thexon continued. 3,000 civilians from a dozen different species. If you attack this world, they all die. But if you're willing to negotiate— "Show me," Voss interrupted. The screen split, showing footage from inside the fortress. Humans, Veltar, Axiom, Krogan, and others were crammed into makeshift holding cells. Families huddled together in fear. Children cried for parents who might already be dead, you see? Thexon's smile was pure poison. "Some things are more important than your precious justice. These people have done nothing wrong. Will you sacrifice them for your vendetta against me?" The bridge fell silent. Every human officer understood what they were seeing. This was the moment when most species would halt their attack, begin negotiations, try to find a solution that saved civilian lives. Admiral Voss studied the images for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was calm and cold. "Warlord Thexon, you have exactly 1 hour to release all civilian prisoners and surrender yourself for judgment. Not for negotiation, not for trial, for execution." Thexon's expression twisted with rage. "You're bluffing. You won't risk innocent lives just to kill me." "You're right," Voss said quietly. "We won't risk innocent lives. We'll save them, and then we'll kill you." She cut the transmission and turned to her tactical officer. "Status on the special insertion teams?" "Quantum phase infiltrators are standing by, Admiral. All units report ready for deployment." Around the galaxy, military observers watched the human fleet with growing confusion. Standard doctrine called for siege tactics against a defended position, orbital bombardment to soften defenses followed by a ground assault. The humans had the firepower to level Malix Prime, but that would kill the hostages. Instead, they did something impossible. At exactly 1 hour after the ultimatum, human ships throughout the fleet launched what looked like empty torpedo tubes. No energy signatures, no explosive warheads. The tubes simply flew toward the planet and vanished. On Malix Prime, alarms began screaming throughout the fortress complex. Syndicate guards ran through corridors, checking cell doors and weapon stations. Everything seemed normal. Then the ghosts arrived. The first guard to die never saw his killer. One moment he was alone in a corridor. The next moment he was dead on the floor with a knife in his back. Security cameras showed empty halls, but bodies kept appearing. The quantum phase infiltration suits were humanity's greatest military secret. Soldiers could shift their molecular structure to pass through solid matter, becoming invisible to most forms of detection. They were living ghosts, able to walk through walls and strike without warning. In the hostage cells, prisoners suddenly found their doors opening. Human soldiers materialized from thin air, their faces hidden behind advanced combat masks. They spoke in calm, professional voices as they guided terrified civilians toward extraction points. "Stay calm," they told the hostages. "We're here to get you out. Follow our instructions exactly and you'll be safe." Throughout the fortress, Syndicate forces found themselves fighting an enemy they couldn't see. Weapons disappeared from hands. Guards vanished from their posts. Command centers went silent as their operators simply ceased to exist. Thexon watched his empire crumble from his command bunker deep beneath the fortress. His communications with the surface had been cut. His elite guards were dead or missing, and somewhere in his own stronghold invisible killers were hunting him. "Sir," one of his remaining lieutenants reported, "we've lost contact with levels 7 through 12. The humans, they're inside somehow." "Impossible," Thexon snarled. "This facility is impregnable. Nothing can get through our defenses." As if in answer to his words, the bunker's blast doors began to open. Not blown apart by explosives, not hacked by computer viruses. They simply opened, as if the locks and security systems had never existed. Human soldiers stepped through the doorway, their quantum phase suits shimmering back into visibility. They moved with the calm precision of professionals doing a job they had trained for their entire lives. "Warlord Thexon," the lead soldier said, his voice distorted by his helmet's communication system. "You are under arrest for crimes against humanity." Thexon's remaining guards opened fire, their weapons blazing in the confined space. The energy beams passed harmlessly through the human soldiers, who had shifted back into phase variants. Return fire was precise and final. When the shooting stopped, only Thexon remained alive. "You can't do this," he said, backing against the far wall. "I have rights. Prisoner of war conventions. I demand a trial." The lead soldier removed his helmet, revealing a young face marked by old scars. "My name is Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Chen," he said quietly. "My sister was Dr. Lisa Chen, xenobotanist at Kepler Station. You killed her while she was trying to grow flowers in zero gravity." Thexon's eyes widened as he recognized the name. The young woman. "She begged for her life. She said she had family." "She did," Chen replied. "She had me." The execution was quick and final. No grand speeches, no theatrical flourishes. Just justice, delivered with the same precision that had characterized every human action since Kepler Station. Above them, the last pockets of Syndicate resistance were being eliminated. The hostages had been evacuated to human ships, where medical teams treated their wounds and counselors helped them process their trauma. The fortress that had never been conquered was falling room by room to soldiers who could walk through walls. By dawn on Malix Prime, it was over. The Zephyrian Syndicate, terror of the outer systems for generations, had ceased to exist. Not defeated, not scattered. Extinct. Admiral Voss stood in the ruins of Thexon's command center, looking at the body of the monster who had started this war with his cruelty. Around her, human soldiers continued their grim work, ensuring that every Syndicate member on the planet was dead. "Admiral," her communications officer reported, "we're receiving transmissions from across the galaxy. News services, government officials, military observers. They all want to know the same thing. What's that? How we did it. How we saved every hostage while eliminating every target. They're calling it impossible." Boss allowed herself a small smile. "Let them wonder. Some secrets are worth keeping." She looked up at the ceiling, imagining the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, other pirates and terrorists were watching the news feeds from Malix Prime. They were learning what happened when someone decided to murder humans for entertainment. The lesson was simple and terrible. Humans didn't negotiate with murderers. They didn't compromise with evil. They didn't accept that some crimes were too expensive to punish. They simply delivered justice no matter what it cost. The Galactic Council chamber had never been so quiet. Representatives from across the galaxy sat in stunned silence, staring at the holographic displays that showed the aftermath of Malix Prime. The fortress world that had never been conquered was now a graveyard. The Zephyrian Syndicate, terror of the outer systems for 3 centuries, was extinct, not defeated, not imprisoned, not reformed. Extinct. Council President Moderator Vexhai called the emergency session to order with trembling appendages. The ancient being had overseen galactic affairs for 2,000 years, but nothing had prepared it for this. "The situation report is unprecedented," it began, its voice carrying across the vast chamber. "The human fleet has completed what they term pest control operations against the Zephyrian Syndicate. Total casualties among Syndicate forces, 100%. Civilian casualties, 0. A ripple of unease passed through the assembled representatives. The mathematics of what the humans had accomplished shouldn't have been possible. In the history of galactic warfare, no military force had ever achieved such precise destruction while maintaining perfect protection of innocent life. The Veltar representative, Kelthon, spoke first. Its crystalline form flickered with agitation. This sets a dangerous precedent. If every species decides to handle criminal organizations through total extermination, we'll have chaos. Chaos. The voice came from the human section, where Ambassador Chen Wei sat with the same calm expression she had worn throughout this crisis. Please explain to me how the complete elimination of a terrorist organization creates chaos. The Axiom delegate's energy form pulsed with concern. Ambassador Chen, surely you understand the implications. What happens when another species decides that some group deserves extinction? Where do we draw the lines? Chen stood slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. When she spoke, her voice carried to every corner of the chamber. The line is simple. Don't murder innocent people for entertainment. It's not complicated. But who decides what constitutes innocent? Demanded the hegemony representative. Who determines what crimes deserve death? The same beings who watched the Syndicate broadcast their atrocities for decades and did nothing, Chen replied. You all knew what they were. You all paid them tribute, negotiated with them, treated them like a natural disaster instead of a choice. You decided that their victims were an acceptable cost for your peace. The Krogan ambassador shifted uncomfortably. His species had once been raiders themselves before learning the price of endless war. Ambassador, your species' actions were thorough. But what message does this send to other criminal organizations? Chen smiled, and that smile sent chills through observers across the galaxy. It sends exactly the message we intended. Murder human civilians for fun, and we will hunt you to extinction. No negotiation. No compromise. No mercy. The chamber erupted in overlapping voices. Representatives from dozens of species tried to speak at once, their words creating a cacophony of concern, condemnation, and confused fear. Moderator Vexhai called for order, but the debate continued. The Veltar accused humanity of barbarism. The Axiom warned of the breakdown of galactic law. The hegemony demanded sanctions against Earth for unauthorized military action. Through it all, Chen waited patiently. When the chamber finally quieted, she spoke again. For 3 months, you've had the opportunity to stop us. You could have declared war on humanity. You could have formed a coalition to protect the Syndicate. You could have blockaded our space or cut off our trade. She paused, looking around the chamber. But you didn't. Do you know why? No one answered. Because deep down you knew we were right, Chen continued. Every species in this chamber has lost people to the Syndicate. Every one of you has paid tribute to monsters and called it diplomacy. You let evil exist because fighting it was too expensive, too complicated, too morally ambiguous. The Veltar representative tried to interrupt. Ambassador, the situation was not so simple. It was exactly that simple. Chen cut it off. Good people were being murdered by bad people, and you chose to look the other way. Well, humanity chose differently. She activated a holographic display showing statistics from across the galaxy. In the 3 months since we began operations against the Syndicate, pirate attacks have dropped 70%. Ransom demands are down 80%. Terrorism incidents have fallen to their lowest level in recorded history. The numbers were undeniable. The galaxy's criminal underworld had taken one look at what happened to the Zephyrian Syndicate and decided that easier targets existed elsewhere. You see, Chen explained, the problem was never that evil was too strong to fight. The problem was that good was too civilized to win. You treated monsters like they were civilized beings who could be reasoned with. We treated them like the animals they chose to become. The Axiom delegate projected calm thoughts, trying to restore order to the chaotic session. But Ambassador, what happens now? Will humanity become the galaxy's self-appointed police force? We don't want to police the galaxy, Chen replied. We want the galaxy to police itself. But if you can't or won't protect innocent life from monsters, then yes, we will. A new voice spoke from the observer section. Commander Davis, the officer who had discovered the massacre at Kepler Station, had been permitted to address the council. I've been asked to read a statement from the families of Kepler Station's victims. He cleared his throat and began. We, the surviving families of those murdered at Kepler Station, thank the people of Earth and the human fleet for ensuring that our loved ones did not die in vain. For too long we were told that justice was impossible, that the cost was too high, that some evils must be endured for the greater good. Humanity proved that this was a lie. Justice is possible. It simply requires the will to pay its price. The chamber fell silent again. These weren't abstract policy discussions anymore. These were real people whose families had been slaughtered, and they were thanking the species that had avenged them. In the days that followed the council session, the galaxy began to change in ways both subtle and profound. Criminal organizations that had operated openly for decades suddenly found themselves looking over their shoulders. Species that had paid tribute to pirates and terrorists began forming their own military responses. The Veltar, despite their public criticism of human methods, quietly began hunting down the crime syndicates that had plagued their trade routes. The Axiom, for all their talk of peaceful solutions, started executing precision strikes against terrorist cells. Even the diplomatic hegemony began taking a harder line against the thugs who had kidnapped their citizens. They didn't call it following the human example. They called it protecting their people. But the results were the same. 6 months after the extinction of the Zephyrian Syndicate, Ambassador Chen received a visitor in her quarters on Nexus Prime. A young Veltar child, its crystalline form small and fragile, stood in her doorway with its parent. "The young one wanted to meet you," the parent explained. "Its family was on a transport that the Syndicate captured last year. Before your people acted," Chen knelt down to the child's level. "Hello there. What's your name?" "Scylla," the child replied in perfect galactic standard. "My mom and papa said the bad people are gone now. They said the humans made them go away." "That's right," Chen said gently. "The bad people can't hurt anyone anymore." "Will they come back?" Chen looked up at the child's parent, then back at Scylla. "Not if we don't let them, and we won't let them." As the Veltar family left, Chen returned to her desk and the reports waiting there. Pirate activity down 90%, terrorism at historic lows, trade routes that had been dangerous for centuries were now safe for civilian traffic. But more than that, the galaxy itself had remembered something it had forgotten. That evil was not a natural disaster to be endured, but a choice to be opposed. That civilization was not weakness but strength applied with precision, that sometimes the most moral action was the complete and total destruction of those who chose to be monsters. The human example had spread like wildfire across the stars. Not because other species wanted to be like humans, but because they remembered what they had once been before fear and compromise had worn down their courage. In the vast darkness between stars, where once pirates and terrorists had hidden, there was now a new kind of darkness. The darkness of hunters, patient and implacable, waiting for evil to show itself so it could be stamped out without mercy or hesitation. The galaxy had learned a simple lesson. Humans don't negotiate with murderers, and neither, it turned out, did anyone else once they remembered they had a choice. The stars themselves seemed brighter for the cleaning, and in the depths of space, children slept safely in their beds knowing that somewhere out there, guardians watched over them with the cold fury of absolute justice. Some things were worth fighting for. Some things were worth dying for. And some things, as the galaxy had finally learned, were worth killing for. Evil had been given its answer, written in fire across the void, never again.